Welcome back. I'm Dr. Pedram Shojai, and thank you for joining us on Interconnected. For me, it's been an eye-opening journey through the recent discoveries of the microbiome. We now know that the organisms in your gut are your body's first line of defense against foreign invaders. They're also the gateway to fighting chronic disease and inflammation. We've learned about the microbiome's role in immunity and digestion in a previous episode, and we examined how antibiotics overwhelm our microbiome and how the hygiene hypothesis is showing that we've gone too far with sterilizing everything. Now, in this episode, we look at the elephant in the room, the billions of pounds of toxins that are suffocating our cells and our health. I met with medical professionals around the country about the harmful effects of environmental toxins and the microbiome's role in shielding us from their poisons. It turns out our bacterial friends serve as the front line of defense for us. A healthy microbiome protects and trains a healthy immune system. A compromised one does just the opposite. We now understand the key role it plays in our very survival and the help it needs to stay out of toxic trouble. Let's get into it.
Well, we do have an epidemic of chronic disease. Unlike anything we've seen in human history, we have heart disease, diabetes, type 2, cancer, autoimmune diseases, dementia, and depression and neurobehavioral disorders, which are exploding. And our genes have not changed much in 20,000 years, but what our genes are exposed to has changed. Our environment has changed. And the environment includes what we eat, it includes environmental toxins, it includes the drugs we're exposed to, like antibiotics, it includes all the insults that we get, whether it's increasing rates of C-sections, increasing rates of antibiotic use early on, lack of breastfeeding. All these things are colluding to create disturbances in our biological function to create disease.
And how alarming it is that all of a sudden so many people are getting sick and the statistics are flying off the chart.
Well, I mean, we've never seen anything like this. Since 1980, we've had up to a 7-fold increase in type 2 diabetes. We've seen our population go from a very small percentage, maybe 10% obese, to now over 30% obese and 70% overweight. We are seeing rises just in the last 30 to 40 years of diseases that are never before at this rate in human history. Autoimmune disease now affects more people than cancer, diabetes, and heart disease combined.
If you allow me the comparison, assume that we are born as a block of marble. That's our genetic makeup. What comes out of it, so who the carves, this in a statue or whatever outcome is the environment. That's what we're interested in.
The recent kind of hockey stick rise in chronic disease, some have blamed environmental factors, toxicity and what. What's your take on what is happening environmentally and some of the kind of major chronic diseases we're seeing?
We've been always working on the premise that there are two necessary and sufficient elements that explain disease in humankind. One is the genetic predisposition, so the genes that we are made of, and the other one is the environment. This epidemic, so these chronic inflammatory diseases, non-infected chronic inflammatory diseases like autoimmune diseases, allergic diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, and so on and so forth, really materialized in the past 50 years or so. This time is way too short to blame genetic mutations. That takes much longer to be responsible for, epidemics of this kind of conditions. And therefore leaves the environment the only culprits that can explain these epidemics, meaning that, we really change the environment way too fast for us to adapt.
So there are our genetics, and then there's the environmental factors, but then there's also this thing called the microbiome with all these organisms that live in us there. So what's the role of the microbiome in this kind of intermediation?
We didn't even understand the magnitude of the microbiome until the recent past, when the technology allowed us to move from, what was our understanding of microbes. So whatever you can grow in a petri dish or see under a microscope, for us was the kingdom of microbes. We know now that we're looking at the tip of a much more complex and bigger iceberg when we were able to use the technology that we're developed during the Human Genome Project to really become culture independent. And therefore now we understand the complexity of this ecosystem that not only live with us and within us, but co-evolve with us. So we have been engineered for the past 2 million years as the consequence of this interplay between us and the microbiome.
What are we doing differently?
I think there's a number of key things that are different and are driving these diseases. And across the spectrum, from the cardiometabolic diseases and lifestyle diseases, the things we don't think of as lifestyle diseases, like the neurodegenerative diseases, neurodevelopmental diseases like ADHD and autism, and of course all the autoimmune and inflammatory diseases. And those changes are our diet. Our diet is radically different. It's low in fiber, it's high in sugar and starch, high in processed foods, low in plant-rich diet, and all these changes, in addition to the hybridization of the food, in addition to the advent of pesticides and glyphosate and other GMO derivatives, we are seeing changes in our diet so dramatic that it's shifted us towards this disease state.
Now, when you look at where food is coming from and how it's growing, it matters. The way that animals are treated matters. When an animal is fed grain and soybeans and lives in a factory farm, another gets to take a breath of fresh air in its entire life and never sees the sun or a blade of grass in its entire life, and it's pumped full of hormones and antibiotics for its entire life, that animal is going to be fat, it's going to be sick, and it's going to carry a completely different nutritional profile than a wild animal that's lived and breathed in the sun and the stars and the rain and lived the way animals are supposed to live. Cows are not supposed to eat corn. It's not how they were designed. They're not supposed to eat soybeans, especially genetically engineered soybeans. It's not how they were designed. So when you defile the natural flow of nature and treat animals with this kind of cruelty, you create a product that fuels suffering and sickness and disease. And this is why I am a passionate advocate for the abolition of the factory farming system. I think it's cruel, I think it's environmentally destructive, and I think it's killing us.
We've also seen a dramatic increase in environmental chemicals, which are exposing us to insults that affect every system in our body. Heavy metals, pesticides, phthalates, PCBs, dioxin, all these things are in our environment. The average newborn has 287 known toxins in their umbilical cord blood before they take their first breath. So we're walking waste dumps.
There are so many problems in this world that can cause us to feel overwhelmed and that can feel unconfrontable. War and violence and climate destabilization and so many issues that we feel overwhelmed by. But when it comes to food, you and I have immense power to shift the course of our destiny. This is one place where you don't have to be at the mercy of anybody. Doesn't matter what happens in the White House or Congress, doesn't matter what happens in the media or your state capitol, doesn't matter what happens in your kid's school. You can choose what you eat, and it's going to shift how you feel.
The point that I'm trying to make here is that, if you look at these epidemics of autoimmune diseases, so we create, a situation in which now you increase fast this autoimmune process in terms of the impact on the human population in a very short period of time. So in other words, we're doing something wrong to increase the number of people that come down with autoimmunity. But if you want to see the same glass half full, that means that if we understand what we did wrong, we can stop these epidemics. And doing that means that, autoimmunity is not a destiny. As a matter of fact, the recipe for chronic inflammatory diseases, including autoimmune diseases, is much more complex than we predicted before. For sure, you have to have genetic predisposition and an environmental trigger, an environmental factor, no question about that. But there are at least other 3 elements at play. One, you just mentioned, a leaky gut or a breach in the barrier that, will allow these 2 worlds, normally segregated by this barrier. Genes, they live in our body. These factors, they are big molecules. They keep at bay outside to physically interact. Something else has to be involved. There's a 4th factor. This immune system is becoming way too belligerent, so something's wrong with the immune system. And then, finally, the 5th element is indeed the microbiome composition and function that it, can influence if and when genes that put us a genetic predisposition would become, active and create the problem.
2 years ago, I started having extreme heart palpitations and joint pain. And I started to question what was going on with my own health and started getting numerous testings all across the board, from lupus to autoimmune to thyroid to to even Lyme disease, and nothing was coming back positive. And so I became very, very confused on what was happening. A year later, my health started to decline even further. I started having joint pain in my hands, tingling. I would have acne breakouts, rashes everywhere. I had memory loss, migraines, chronic fatigue, to the point where I literally could not get out of bed unless I was drinking coffee all day long. I was just praying for an answer and recognized that the only thing that I hadn't had checked was my implants. About 10 years ago, I made a decision to get implants because I was working in the fashion industry, and I had little knowledge of the impact that implants could actually have on your health. From just doing the research and looking online, I found a group of 40,000 women, all with the same symptoms, all sick with their implants. And I recognized that this is it. This is probably what's going on. Well, I went to different doctors, some of the best doctors in the world, and they said, it can't be your implants. And I even went to some of the best plastic surgeons that also said, it's not your implants. Implants don't cause autoimmune unless they're leaking. Well, then I got an MRI that showed that they weren't leaking and they were fully intact. At that point, I just kept going to different doctors and finally found a plastic surgeon who believed in my symptoms and said, what's the worst case that's gonna happen? At least you get them out and you'll see. And from that, I got them out, and from my pathology reports, it came back positive for a biofilm, chronic infection, and that my body basically was breaking down the implant and there was foreign material surrounding the implant. And within 3 weeks, most of my symptoms are completely gone. What happens is it's a bacterial infection. Basically, the bacterial becomes attached to the implant, and it's very, very hard to disrupt with antibiotic. And so until they take the implant out, it's very hard to test for. But once she was able to take it out and she took the entire capsule out, she was then able to find that there was a P. acne biofilm that was causing chronic inflammation and a chronic infection in my body. And again, within 3 weeks, I'm feeling incredible and like a completely different person.
Did they actually leak, or was it the biofilm that became the toxic kind of infectious ailment?
So my implants, according to my MRI, were completely intact. And that's what's confusing, is that a lot of studies are now showing that with silicone gel, that the gel can actually penetrate the walls and come through and leak into your body. My pathology report came back conclusive for foreign material in the exterior layers of my tissue that were taken out at the time of explantation. So at that point, they knew that my body basically was doing what my body was supposed to do, which is fight this foreign object in my body, and was trying to break it down. And so pieces of the implant were coming off and going into my body.
Our microbiome is a representation of the environment that's immediately around us. And if you take a look at the typical American who wakes up in an air-conditioned home, we call it a house, but it's actually a drywall box that's got heating and air conditioning systems that never allow the room to cycle through a normal cycle of seasons. You never get a normal passage of microbiome through the house. So you have carpet that's off-gassing, you've got a mattress that's off-gassing chemicals that are destroying microbiome as well as your own cells. And then you put that person immediately into a hot shower, and they soap down with antimicrobial soap. And they get out and they towel off and they put on aluminum-based antiperspirants, and then they jump, maybe cover themselves with some makeup that's got heavy metals and everything else and killing the microbiome of the skin. And then they jump in a car that's off-gassing plastic, and they haven't even left the house yet because the car was in the garage. And so now they've pulled out in an off-gassing plastic-encased car and drive in an HVAC system to an office where they might get 300 yards of walking from car to desk, and then they're again in that same environment.
What about, say, the soy-based products, or all these kind of estrogen-based, estrogens and all this crap that's in our environment and our soaps and the parabens and all that? And how would that impact someone with the BRCA gene? And what does one have to do about environmental triggers or environmental estrogen exposure?
So environmental estrogen exposure is so important if you have a BRCA gene or you have a high risk for breast cancer. So you need to, number one, see where you are starting. So that's where we measure toxic levels, right? So someone that has a BRCA gene or an incredible high risk for breast cancer needs to spend the money to have that test to see what the toxic levels are in her body, and then be certain to avoid whatever it is that's at a high level. But in general, if we don't have that test, you want to avoid these foreign estrogens, what we call xenoestrogens. And so you can go to a site like the Environmental Working Group, for example, ewg.org, where there's a list of cosmetics that don't have these estrogenic qualities to them or xenoestrogens in them. And there's a breast cancer nonprofit called keepabreast.org. I happen to be their medical director, and they co-created this list with Environmental Working Group. And so start by avoiding those chemicals, those makeup and cosmetic issues. I mean, women, there's a statistic there that women put on, over 1,000 chemicals a day into their bodies before they get to work, just with all of the different beauty products that they use. So that's so important. I'm not someone that is afraid of soy. I think soy is okay as long as it's non-GMO. Non-GMO soy is okay, and and you can eat that responsibly. Not 3 meals a day, but certainly a couple of times a week, it's fine to have soy.
Something about the buildup of toxicity in my body, I was unable to sweat. So not only was I carrying this toxic load, I was having trouble excreting it. And everyone that was close to me was having some real challenges believing that my laundry detergent was leading to, me not being able to get out of bed in the morning. Any chemical in my environment added to this. So it wasn't just heavy metals. It's, the stuff in my shampoo, in my laundry detergent, in my face cream, in my food, pesticides, preservatives, dyes, all of that stuff. It's all a factor. And I've had to make a point to be really clean about everything in my life.
A number of chronic diseases, if not the vast majority, are due to the interaction between the environment and particularly our genetics, our individual genetics. And that our history of diet, our history of environmental exposures, and how that interacts with our genes is what ultimately manifests in certain chronic diseases.
In my family, there's always been diseases that we just find kind of weird. I recently lost a sister to Cushing's disease. A few years ago, I lost a sister to cancer. I have a sister with multiple chemical sensitivity, and my son has 2 autoimmune conditions. So there's obviously some things going on with my genes that need to be looked at. And I really think that what we found when looking at my genetic profile points to a lot of those things. And now that I have that information, now that I know how important it is for us to be avoiding certain toxins and to be making sure that we are detoxifying as well as we can, that hopefully future generations won't continue to get these diseases and we won't continue to lose family members in their 50s.
Unfortunately, people like Genevieve are the canaries in the coal mine. We're all being bombarded by toxic chemicals, and those of us with genetic predisposition and lower tolerance are getting sick first. With the wave of antibiotics flooding our bodies from the food supply, is it just a matter of time before our microbiomes are compromised and we suffer the same issues? Unfortunately, that seems to be what the science is pointing to. Here's a summary of just some of the toxic facts that are affecting our health today. We've learned that heavy metals, pesticides, phthalates, PCBs, and dioxin are all enemies of the microbiome. The average newborn has 287 known toxins in their umbilical cord blood before they take their first breath. Our microbiomes represent the environment that's immediately around us, almost a reflection of our environment on display for our immune system to sense. Chronic disease can be due to the interaction between your environment, individual genetics, and your history of diet. Building a resilient microbiome can act as a defensive shield against toxins. We'll get right back to the episode in just a second. First, I wanted to take a quick moment to tell you how you can own the entire series. Watch, rewatch, and share with your friends at your leisure. Below this video, you'll find a link to the full Interconnected documentary series and how to get access to a number of powerful bonuses for a one-time discounted price. This way, you get unlimited access to every single episode of Interconnected, plus we've put together a number of complimentary resources that'll help you restore, replenish, and rejuvenate your microbiome at home. Look, these are our free gift to you when you invest in the full package during this launch. Remember, the power to heal begins inside of you, so if you want to harness this incredible power of your own microbiome, or if you simply want to share this groundbreaking information with friends and family, go ahead and click on the link below. It even gets better because the proceeds from this will also help us share this information in the promise of personalized natural medicine with the world. You get to help yourself, you get to help the world, and there's no risk here. Just a very real risk that if you miss out on this limited time offer, you won't have access to this, right? So click the link below, you own the full set, you get involved in healing yourself by tapping into the power of your microbiome. Okay, back to the episode. Okay, so we understand that the world is toxic, but is there hope? My personal instinct is to run for the hills, but that's not a real solution. The cities are encroaching and pollution knows no borders. It will find you. So what do we do? How do we eat? What strategies can we employ to overcome the toxic exposure? The answer is personal.
Back in the day, part of our practices were to actually help the body cleanse and eliminate, and it was the way that we practiced our medicine, although I don't believe it was actually known to be medicine. But many of the practices began back in biblical times. As an example, a cleansing of the colon was done with a gourd and sugar cane. So they would hang gourds in the rivers and add water and attach a sugar cane to the rectum and literally eliminate in the river. And this was done to cleanse the body. And I love saying this to my patients, cleanliness is next to godliness. So many of the practices of cleanliness began back in the day as a way to eliminate and clean ourselves, to clean our spirit, right? So what ends up happening is that practices like sauna, there's so many other practices, diet, fasting, right? Ramadan cultures, Lent. These things are all part of cleansing and all things that in my clinical practice, we practice this day and age because they do make a huge impact on the body. What's interesting is that you could take any system with any type of condition, whether it is an irritated bowel, a constipation, a diarrhea, or a Crohn's colitis, a cancer, autoimmunity, and you take their system, and if you begin to help the body to eliminate out toxins, and most of our toxins are self-produced by our body, right? Like our stool is one of our biggest toxins, or carbon dioxide. These toxins need to come out properly and regularly, and when they don't, that's when they cause disease. So any of these patients, you take them in a clinical practice, if you put them through a cleanse, what ends up happening, and a cleanse, to clarify, is truly just enhancing the body's ability to do its natural elimination processes. That's all that it is. Whether it's via sweat or the stools or better breath, urination, alkalinizing the urine is a practice that can help with better elimination from the urine. These are simple practices that just help to get stuff out. And by doing that, we actually can get the body to a better state of balance. And that better state of balance can help us really find out what the true problem is and then address that specifically.
I went to 15 different doctors before I finally found one that understood the connection between the toxic issue and the gut issue. At the time, all I knew is that I felt miserable. I started having terrible digestive upset, which I assumed was because of the diets that I was doing. Kind of all that stuff that goes with IBS. That lasted about 2.5 years before I finally learned about the detox issue. So we started out, I had a doctor that was a pretty smart detective. She was about practitioner 10, and noticed that my symptoms were connected to mercury poisoning. My detox pathways are compromised, so basically my liver doesn't produce the proper enzymes to clear those toxins. So I had this kind of triple whammy going on. I grew up in Portland in a house that was built prior to when lead paint was outlawed, and the house was never updated, so I had a lot of exposure just in the dust around my house. I had several mercury fillings, and I was a tooth grinder, so I was getting a lot of my mercury from that. But also it was just kind of normal, a lot of just normal stuff that most people are exposed to on a regular basis, and ideally we're able to detox. But for my body, it was especially hard to do so. When I got what I later found out was SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which can happen as a result of mercury poisoning, then my digestion slowed down quite a bit too. So I was doing all these therapies to try to pull out the toxins, but it was really important to be able to then move it from my body once we kind of took it from their hiding place. So we did the herbs and the chelating agents to draw out the toxins, and then I did colonics and saunas, a lot of them, to try to then excrete them. I was doing saunas every single day for hours is what I was able to gradually build up to until my symptoms started decreasing, and I was able to decrease the amount of time that I spent in the sauna. And then we focused a lot on keeping my digestion moving. So we did colonics and took a lot of supplements, enemas, all sorts of things to just keep things moving through. I just want to point out real quick that after that year and a half, I was told that I had a clean bill of health or that the SIBO was gone, but I really felt like it wasn't quite yet. And it took me getting to the point where the toxins were really very out of my life, that I was at the point that I was in a very clean home environment where I got SIBO again, full force, about 6 months later, and I was able to clear it up after about 6 weeks. So I really think that it's the clearing out the toxins that was key to getting my gut bacteria right. Now my life is amazing.
The three major areas where people eliminate out of are, number one, through the sweat, and there's so many people who do not sweat. I mean, we make it a regular practice to sweat daily, whether that's exercise or what have you. Number two is through urination. Urination is important because that eliminates a lot of toxins that have been already processed by the liver. And number three is your stools. Stools are so important because they help to eliminate all fat-soluble toxins that are remnant within the body, and many environmental toxins are fat soluble. With regards to elimination of toxins from the gut, two really important factors besides the traditional just fiber is fats, and then improving the way that we have peristalsis, or motility of the gut. So how that is done is typically in enhancing the fat that you're absorbing orally, because fat actually transports a lot of toxins, the fat soluble toxins, out of the body. And then GI motility can be increased by reducing stress on the system. One of my favorite ways to do that is with an old classical therapy called the castor oil pack, or even castor oil, because castor oil has the ability to stimulate prostaglandin E1 and E3, hence improving smooth muscle contraction.
We know, especially from studies on the microbiome in the gut, that environmental toxins have a dramatic impact on the bacteria and fungus in the gut. It really disrupts things. So what I found is that a lot of people will really have a flare-up of these chronic sinusitis if they're either living in toxic mold or they're exposed to chemicals. So a lot of times, if we can do the work to help to detoxify the body and to make sure that they're not being exposed somewhere in their environment, whether it's their home, their car, their work, their school, then the immune system works better to keep the microbiome and the sinuses intact. Mold is an epidemic in our country. So many buildings have mold, especially schools, office buildings, and now a lot of the ways that the current homes are being built, it's very easy for mold to grow. And unfortunately, what happens is the mold spores can actually get into the sinuses and start to have a party. And then I actually have a number of patients who have had mold growing in their guts. So to help them, the best thing to do is to figure out where it's coming from and then eliminate it in that environment. But it can be very hidden and very tricky to find sometimes. Sometimes you have to use like a DNA probe of the dust in the building to find it, because some of the worst molds don't actually send out spores. So a lot of the traditional testing misses that there's mold in a building. And then the body itself is it very much depends on a person's nutritional status and their genetics. But I find that things like liposomal glutathione, certain binders like clay and charcoal, NAC, can really help basically the person's getting their barrels building up. So instead of having things just flush through like we kind of hope that they do, they start building up. So helping to open up some of those pathways for the person to be able to eliminate the toxins. So whether it's the mycotoxins or MVOCs from mold, or the glyphosate that we're getting in our food that disrupts our microbiome, or the sofa or mattress that's outgassing, those types of things can really help. So it's glutathione, the binders, NAC, and then I also really liked the person to be taking some minerals, because that also helps those enzymes to work better.
But our microbiome wants to survive as well. I mean, if you've got a lot of gut yeast hanging out, I mean, they're going to flourish with sugar. When I detox, when I identify yeast in the microbiome, and we have to work on it, this 12-year-old boy is an example who I was talking about earlier, who has the rash. I mean, we're going to have to detox him off of sugar. There's no doubt in my mind, given his history. And that yeast are likely playing a piece of the puzzle in the gut, and maybe on the rash itself. But he's going to go through a detox period where he's going to feel pretty lousy, and he's likely going to crave some sugar. And it's what I call a changing of the microbiome guards. The old bad guard is dying off, and the new one is allowed to be built up. And while it's dying off, it's fighting because it wants to survive. Our gut microbiome can produce bioactive compounds that can influence the central nervous system powerfully as well, and play a role in craving. I mean, it's challenging. So if I'm detoxing, if I'm walking with somebody from, bad, addictive, powerfully addictive diet to the, freedom of wellness and freedom from addiction, how do I do it? First of all, I want to be really honest with my patients when I take their history and I'm thinking about their timeline and what happened to get them to where they are today, and I'm thinking about what they're going to need to do on the journey, what I'm seeing, and I'll validate that with laboratory data at some point. But as I'm looking at all of that, I want to very frankly spell out for them what I think they're going to need to do. I don't want to pull any punches. I want them to know. Probably you're going to need to do a pretty rigorous therapeutic diet. You'll probably need some nutrients. In fact, you might need to take more nutrients and change your diet in such a way that you're going to hate me for a while. And I'm entirely fine with that. But this is what happened to get you to where you are, and this is what I suspect we're going to need to do. And I ask them if they're willing to engage with me in that journey. And I'll ask them sometimes to rate their willingness. How willing are you to do this? Generally speaking, people are extremely willing when it's spelled out to them very clearly. And so that's how I get people to enroll in doing it. With children, usually I would say that the time that I will ask them to eliminate those foods is shorter. And I'll do the minimum amount of time that I think we can get a therapeutic response sufficient to gauge whether or not that food is influencing them. So that's a shorter time period. But I've got to have a very honest dialogue with them on how willing are they to do this, and will they hang in there? And if they're going to cheat, I want to know about it. Sometimes I'll even, I'll just give them my cell phones because they don't email, just text me so I know. And I want to at least talk to them about it before they, break down and have that big bowl of ice cream. But I find honest dialogue with what they're going to go through, and an honest negotiation around what they'll do to be absolutely a fundamental requirement. And sometimes if mom and dad are willing to actually engage in a bribe, it helps. It'll help get them on board. But, again, kids who are coming to this work and making these changes are struggling with something. They've been to a lot of doctors and they haven't gotten help. And so by the time they show up at my door, they tend to say, all right, I'm not happy about it, but I'll do it.
Rome wasn't built in a day, and our guts have taken years to be in their current state. Detox can take a while. Gut rebuilding can also be slow. That's the way of things. In our insane get-it-now culture, we've been trained to think there's a quick fix miracle pill for everything. That doesn't work, and it's why we're in the situation we're in. Chronic disease is on the rise because of this lie, and we're in trouble. So what does work? Lifestyle change, detoxification, gut rebuilding, and the restoration of a healthy microbiome. Let's review what we learned in this segment. The three major elimination pathways are sweat, urine, and feces. Mold can also throw off the gut microbiome, so you need to check for mold exposure in your house. In fact, penicillin is the first antibiotic we were able to mass produce, and it was derived from mold. Here are some gut-building supplements: liposomal glutathione, certain binders like clay and charcoal, and NAC. Also, just be aware of harsh die-off reactions from yeast and bacteria. Sometimes we can feel sick when the bad colonies are dying off, so don't get discouraged. There's an old saying, still water breeds poison. This applies directly to our bodies as well. Without the proper flow of lymph and fluids, we can't eliminate toxins, so we retain them and get sick. That illness shows up in a variety of ways, and people get confused about their individual diagnosis. Yeah, well, that's just where something sprung a leak, but the issue is bigger. It's the lens we're looking through. Let's help the body's ability to heal instead of slapping Band-Aids on multiple downstream problems. There's a catch-all syndrome that many people are labeled with called irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS. It's like the profession's way of saying, I don't know, but it looks like you have a tummy ache. That'll be $300. There's also inflammatory bowel disease, or IBD. There's Crohn's and colitis and SIBO, or small intestine bacterial overgrowth. These are often misdiagnosed and are treated incorrectly. The good news is that we're getting closer to the answer. And from the medical professionals I spoke with, it seems to be connected to the microbiome.
I'm a traditionally trained board-certified gastroenterologist, and 10 years ago I was doing clinical research, and I was working with a pharmaceutical company to look for a cure or something to help people with irritable bowel syndrome. And it was at that time that we discovered that bacteria growing where it shouldn't be, called bacterial overgrowth, could be the culprit of a lot of these symptoms that people are having. Change in bowel habits, bloating, abdominal discomfort. And that's where my research started, and while I was working with several other researchers around the country, it was shown to me that people that are bloated and constipated, it could be because they're having a type of bacteria that is producing methane. And what the methane does is it slows everything down, and that's the root cause of all of this. So when we talk about the microbiome, or I like to refer to as the multibiome, because there's a lot going on, most of that should be going on in the colon. You have 100 trillion bacteria in your colon. I always say you should be eating for 100 trillion. You see a pregnant woman, you tell her to eat for 2, let's all eat for 100 trillion. Now, so most of the bacteria should be located in the colon, and as long as you have a lot of diversity, meaning a lot of different types of bacteria, then those bacteria will help you be a better person. Now, what happens in this particular case is that somebody can go through a stressful situation, take antibiotics, or even have an infection, and then that shocks the small intestine, and you have an area that doesn't move well. That allows bacteria to start growing, and it is some of the bacteria that we will find in the colon. The one that produces the methane is known as a methanogen or Methanobrevibacter smithii. It used to be that if you came in with those symptoms and you got worked up, blood work was normal, your scopes were normal, then somebody would just pat you on the head and say, well, you just have IBS. And they would actually treat it as if it's in your head. So a traditional treatment would have been antidepressants.
Like, I really felt terrible. I was fatigued. I would go to work. I would do my job, put on a happy face, put on that slimwear like an iron lung and go do my job, drive home and go to sleep. I was just beyond. This was about 2014. And so I decided I really had to get serious because it was not getting better and it wasn't staying the same. Like, it's amazing the things we can tolerate if it's just like, okay. And so I went to a GI doctor who told me that walking or running 3 miles a day was really great for constipation. And that's what I should do. And gave me an antidepressant. Nice man, smart guy, excellent at scoping, it turns out later, but not keeping up on the latest research. So I thought this guy was telling me it was all in my head and that I was nuts.
Then this paradigm shift has taken place where we realize, well, it could just be due to the bacteria. So once that happened, then everybody's like, bacterial overgrowth, we need to get rid of the bacteria. Now, one of the interesting things when we were doing our initial research 10 years ago is that the type of bacteria that produces methane is in its own kingdom. It's known as an archaeobacter. So even though we're trying to drop all this napalm, the napalm has been built for other types of bacteria. So even traditional antibiotics don't work well on it. And that's why we realize that if we can get rid of this type of organism or get it back to where it should be, then we can start helping all these people. But once you start dumping these antibiotics on people, absorbable antibiotics, I should say, then you don't know what they're messing up. You could be doing more harm than good. What we found in our research, so I believe that the archaeobacter has been known about since the origins of microbiology. We know that it's fungi, archaea, and then eukaryotes. But this whole concept of it being found in the small intestine creating issues is probably only about 12 years old. And that was actually, all the work was done out of Cedars-Sinai and came out with some great research where we went, wow, now we're looking at this organism, and that's why people aren't getting better.
One of my clients came to me and she was struggling with excess weight. She had poor digestion. I mean, she had IBS, diarrhea 1 second, constipation the next. And she was very moody, very uncomfortable in her own skin. That's probably one of the number one things I hear from people. They feel uncomfortable. She also was on medication for her heart and for her lungs. After 8 weeks of working together, she went back to her doctor, and her doctor took her down 20% off of her medications, right? So he lowered the dose of her medications for her heart and for her lungs. But what's interesting is she came back to me disappointed. She's like, I want my gut to get better. I came here to heal my gut, and we're not there yet. And she had seen some improvement in her digestion, but what I found very interesting is that, your body doesn't, wait, how do I say this? I have a little soundbite here. You don't get to decide the order in which your body heals. And so with the work that she was doing, her body was healing. It's just that it chose to go with healing her lungs first.
My aha moment on putting these polyphenols together is when I realized that there was legislation in the Midwest. I'm originally from Omaha, and my research partner was from Iowa. And we realized that, wow, they've been trying to decrease methane production in cattle for a long time, and they've been using food products. Why don't we just use that knowledge and move it over and do some human clinical trials on this? And so we put together 3 polyphenols. Quebracho is the main one. It's the bark from a very old tree that actually has natural defense against fungi and archaea species. That's the workhorse, and we realized that if we can get people to take that in a concentrated form, it doesn't get absorbed and will actually get the bacteria to go back to where they should. Then the other 2 polyphenols are there to also shut off the enzyme and calm the area down. And so that's why we believe that you can do this safer, more naturally using these types of polyphenols, which coincidentally are actually good for you because when they get to the colon, your colonic bacteria, if you have a healthy colonic bacteria, they will actually break it down into these, well, we're going to call them postbiotics. As a gastroenterologist, I treat very sick people. We have seen that really takes up to about 20 days to take a good round of treatment and then just take it daily to support those bacteria in the colon. Some people get better much quicker, others actually take a little bit longer, but all our studies were actually shown to be about 20 days. Unfortunately, we don't have a true gold standard of a test. There are several tests out there. The best that we have available on the market is actually a breath test, and what that means is you take in an unabsorbable sugar like lactulose, and then you measure the rise in gases, and if the bacteria are breaking them down, then you'll see these big spikes. So it's not the most sensitive nor specific test, but it's the best that we have.
I was talking to a girlfriend at work who also had some similar scenarios with her digestion, and she said that she had taken this crazy test where you drink this stuff and you blow into a tube. It's a SIBO breath test for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which I have to say, when I heard the name of the condition, this is what I do. I was like, oh, that sounds terrible. I don't have that. How could I possibly have that? That sounds disgusting. So, of course I had it. So I did the breath test, went to the University of South Florida and stayed there in the office. You drink this lactulose solution and it feeds the bugs, and then you blow into a breath capturing tube and they test to see how much hydrogen or how much methane has been released into your body. And sure enough, I have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. What is that? Well, it's the primary cause of IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and it is when good or bad bacteria is in the small intestine creating like a fermentation, like a still or a brewery, because that bacteria consumes your food and then releases methane or hydrogen gas, and so you poof up. That bacteria is not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily like pathogenic. It's actually the bacteria that should be in your large intestine, right? So that whole microbiome thing and why people take probiotics. But for a variety of reasons, it ends up in the small intestine.
What I traditionally do when I see somebody, rather than incur more costs, I listen to the history, and if they give me a good classic history, like I was fine, and then a few years ago, I got sick, or I went through a really tough divorce, then ever since then, I've not been right. And then when I eat, specifically starchy foods, I'll blow up like I'm 4 months pregnant, is what everybody always says. To me, the history says so much in that they really sound like a classic person that has this problem, and I'll treat. If I treat and they don't get better, then I start thinking about ordering a bunch of tests and seeing what happens. One of those tests being a hydrogen breath test. The downside would be that now we have to go back and really start looking, because we can't just say everything is going to be this box of SIBO bacterial overgrowth. We know that a lot of diseases can present in unique ways like that. You can be bloated due to stricturing, due to Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. You can actually have bacterial overgrowth in the setting of something else. So an underlying disease can lead to that and vice versa. So the downside is that we would then have to really start looking and make sure we're not missing anything. Basically, if you're a classic person with these classic symptoms, really 4 out of 5 people, or greater than 80%, are going to have significant improvement. And then those people that don't, we pare those down, and I'll find 10% of unique organic causes. And of the last 10%, we're still looking to figure out how to help these people. Various combinations, working with different scientists around the world. So it's a bit of a moving target, but we've made huge strides in helping these people that have been very frustrated.
It's amazing to see people who will struggle with health challenges for 5, 10, 15, sometimes 20 years. And you feel like you're going to be stuck like this forever, like there's nothing you're going to be able to do to get better. Maybe it's acid reflux, maybe it's irritable bowel syndrome, maybe it's something like inflammatory bowel disease or a thyroid condition, and you just feel like you're going downhill. And yet when we make the right changes, sometimes you'll see transformations in just a few days. I know for me, within 3 days, my irritable bowel syndrome that I had for almost a decade went away. And this was something I tried every over-the-counter treatment for. I even tried prescription medications for.
I think the future of everything is going to come down to this postbiotic. That comes down to feeding your bacteria and having the proper amount of right bacteria to break down these molecules for beneficial aspects. A recent article just came out where it actually showed in mice that if you feed them really bad food, then basically certain types of bacteria will proliferate more, and then the postbiotic that they do is actually somewhat inflammatory. So the postbiotics, just like all things in nature, there has to be balance to it. Mother Nature still is much smarter than anything we can do in a lab. And when we see different things, I think it is still best to try and go the natural route, try and let Mother Nature figure it out, and ultimately we become healthier all around.
Bacteria are the missing puzzle piece in almost every disorder we've come across in this segment. Until very recently, many doctors have been looking the other way. We now understand that bringing the right species to the right areas of the bowel is key. Certain bacteria belong in the stomach, as others belong in the large intestine. If they end up in the small intestine, we have a problem. Certain polyphenols can successfully treat some of these conditions, as can certain natural antibiotics and antifungals. We've included a comprehensive list of these for you in the Natural Home Remedies and Antibiotics Guide. Let's review what we've learned here. Bloating can come from SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It can come from Crohn's disease, colitis, and more. Methanobrevibacter smithii is a methanogen that can cause SIBO and can be tested for. These archaeon live in the small intestine and are an ancient form of pre-bacteria without a nucleus. They consume sugars and starches and let off methane as a byproduct, which makes us gassy and bloated. To treat this, some doctors are using potent polyphenols like the bark from the quebracho tree. Now, what if you could help yourself by bringing this healing knowledge into your home and help support our quest to share this information with the world? What is it that you use at home when you get sick, where we're going to share natural remedies that don't destroy your microbiome? Click the button below this video and check out how to get the full Interconnected documentary series, plus a collection of exclusive bonus resources that are only available to those who invest the full set. The best part, you can get the entire package at a massive 50% discount only during this live launch. You get lifetime access to everything you've seen in the episodes, which is the video, the audio, and text transcripts, and you'll get companion guides, extended uncut interviews, and the How to Live Probiotically guide that helps you put the work into your life and everything you learn in the series. We also have a holiday recipe cooking guide that's going to help you be so happy with what you've prepared. It's not going to destroy your health during the holidays. You can live probiotically. It only happens during this live launch, so put the power of the microbiome into your own hands. Order the Interconnected at-home set right now, risk-free. Back to the episode. Studying the microbiome is leading us to so many answers. It gives us more treatment options and our understanding to why and how we may suffer. We want to thank all of the doctors and patients that never gave up, that fought for more information and surviving beyond their mysterious illnesses. They're reminders that we all must keep going. There's hope and there are answers. Keep digging. Coming up next time in Interconnected, we explore the gut-brain connection, how our microbiome and brain communicate, and how they can affect Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autism, ADD, sleep issues, anxiety, depression, and much more. Until then, I'm Dr. Pedram Shojai. Be well.